What happens when a power-hungry flight attendant, fueled by prejudice, tries to humiliate a passenger in front of an entire plane? She makes a shocking demand, forcing a black woman to get on her hands and knees and clean a mess she didn't make. The flight attendant thought she was untouchable, a queen in her metal kingdom at 30,000 feet. But she made one critical mistake. She had no idea that the quiet, dignified woman she chose as her victim wasn't just another passenger. She was the one who signed her paychecks. This isn't just a story of karma. It's the story of how a single act of malice led to an entire airline being brought to its knees, only to be reborn from the ashes of one woman's breathtaking arrogance. Stay tuned. The air in the terminal at JFK was a familiar chaotic symphony, the frantic clicking of rolling suitcases, the distant muffled announcements of gate changes, and the low hum of 1,000 conversations blending into one. For most, it was a place of transition, a stressful but necessary purgatory between departure and destination. For Imani Grant, it was a laboratory. Dressed in a simple but elegant pair of grey travel trousers, a comfortable cashmere sweater, and practical loafers, she looked like any other seasoned traveller. Her hair was styled in neat professional braids, and the only hint of her true status was the vintage, understated Patek Philippe watch on her wrist. A quiet nod to a fortune built not on inheritance, but on relentless innovation in the world of software logistics. No one gave her a second glance, and that was precisely the point. 6 months ago, Imani had done the unthinkable. Through a series of aggressive, brilliantly executed acquisitions, her private equity firm, Grant Holdings, had purchased a majority stake in Starlight Airlines. It was a legacy carrier, once a titan of the skies, now struggling with a reputation for poor service aging fleets, and a corporate culture that had grown stagnant and sour. Wall Street analysts had called the purchase a fool's errand, a vanity project for a tech billionaire who knew nothing about aviation. But Imani saw potential. She saw a broken system that could be fixed, a brand that could be polished back to its former glory. But you couldn't fix a problem you didn't understand. And you couldn't understand the customer experience from a leather chair in a Manhattan skyscraper. So for the past 2 months, Imani had been flying incognito, always in economy, on random domestic routes. JFK to Dallas-Fort Worth was today's experiment. She wasn't looking for VIP treatment. She was hunting for the truth. Her boarding pass for Flight 1128 read, Seat 17C. An aisle seat. As she queued with the C Group passengers, she observed. She watched the gate agents noting their curt, mechanical tone. She saw how they smiled warmly at a white family struggling with a stroller, then barely made eye contact with the elderly Hispanic couple behind them. These were the data points her spreadsheets and reports could never capture. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, a flight attendant stood at the aircraft door. The woman's name tag read Brenda. She was in her late 40s, with a severe blonde bob that looked lacquered into place and a thin, downturned mouth that suggested a permanent state of dissatisfaction. She greeted passengers with a tight, forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. When a young man with a backpack asked her a question, her smile vanished, replaced by a sigh of pure exasperation. Imani offered a polite, "Good morning," as she passed. Brenda's eyes flickered over her from her braids, down to her simple loafers, and the smile didn't return. She simply gave a curt nod, her gaze already moving to the next person in line. It was a small thing, a micro-dismissal, but it was another data point. Imani filed it away and made her way down the narrow aisle. She found her row. A young couple was already seated in the window, and middle seats 17A and 17B. They were engrossed in their phones, headphones on. Imani smiled, preparing to slide into her seat 17C. And then she saw it. The seat was a mess. Not disastrously so, but undeniably unclean. Crumbs of what looked like a croissant were scattered across the cushion and wedged into the crease. A sticky, dark purple residue, likely grape juice, formed a small, ugly patch on the seatback in front of her. A used napkin was crumpled in the seatback pocket. It was the kind of mess left behind by a hurried or careless passenger, and the kind of thing that should have been caught and cleaned by the ground crew between flights. Imani paused. Her first instinct was to call a flight attendant, but she decided to wait. This was a test. What was the standard procedure here? Would the crew be proactive? Would they even notice? She stood in the aisle deliberately, not sitting, waiting to see what would happen as the final passengers boarded. It was Brenda who noticed her. She strode down the aisle, her movements sharp and efficient. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" she asked, her voice laced with an impatient edge. "You're holding up the boarding process." Imani gestured calmly to the seat. "I'm sorry, it seems the seat hasn't been cleaned. There's a spill and some food left on it." Brenda glanced down her upper lip, curling in faint disgust. She saw the mess. Then her eyes moved back to Imani, and a strange, cold calculation seemed to pass through them. She didn't look apologetic or concerned. She looked annoyed. "I see," Brenda said, her voice dropping the feigned politeness. She straightened up, crossing her arms. "The ground crew is very thorough. Are you sure you didn't make this mess yourself just now?" The accusation was so sudden, so baseless, that it took Imani a moment to process. "I just got here," she stated simply, keeping her voice even. "I haven't even sat down." Brenda let out a small, disbelieving scoff. She looked at the young couple next to the seat, who were now watching their headphones off. She looked back at Imani, her gaze lingering as if assessing a suspect. "Well," Brenda said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "Someone has to clean it up before we can take off. We can't have the aircraft in this state." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. This wasn't just about a dirty seat anymore. It was about to become a spectacle. And as Imani stood there, the quiet observer in her own laboratory, she had a sinking feeling that her experiment was about to yield its most disturbing data yet. The cabin hummed with the quiet tension of an audience before a play. Passengers who had been mindlessly scrolling through their phones or adjusting their neck pillows were now subtly turning their heads. The confrontation in row 17 was becoming the in-flight entertainment. Imani met Brenda's hard stare without blinking. "I agree, it should be cleaned up," she said, her tone deliberately reasonable. "Could you please get some wipes, or have a member of the crew attend to it?" This simple, logical request seemed to enrage Brenda. It was a rejection of the narrative she was trying to build, one where Imani was the problem. Brenda's face tightened, and she placed a hand on her hip, adopting the posture of a weary authority figure dealing with an unruly subordinate. "Ma'am, our crew is extremely busy preparing the cabin for a safe and on-time departure," she said, enunciating each word as if speaking to a child. "We are not a cleaning service. Passengers are expected to be responsible for their own space." "But this isn't my space yet," Imani countered, still holding her ground in the aisle. "And it isn't my mess. It was here when I arrived." From a few rows back, a man's voice piped up. "She's right. I saw the family with the little kid sitting there on the last leg from Orlando. They were eating snacks the whole time." Brenda shot a venomous glare in the direction of the voice, but it had already planted a seed of doubt among the other passengers. The young man in seat 17B, whose name was Liam Peterson, a journalism student on his way to a college conference, now felt emboldened to speak. "Yeah, the seat was definitely like that when she got here," he said, looking at Brenda. "I noticed it when I sat down." Brenda's fury now had a new target. She turned her icy gaze on Liam. Sir, I would appreciate it if you would stay out of airline personnel matters." She then turned back to Imani, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. "Look, I don't have time for this debate. Either you clean up the mess so you can sit down, or I will have you removed from this aircraft for refusing to take your seat and delaying departure. It's your choice." The threat was audacious. It was a gross abuse of power, a weaponization of FAA regulations designed for safety, not for personal vendettas. Imani could feel the blood pounding in her ears, but her expression remained a mask of preternatural calm. She had dealt with hostile negotiations in boardrooms worth billions of dollars. She would not be broken by a petty tyrant in a polyester uniform. At that moment, the purser, a man named Mark Jensen, arrived. He was older than Brenda, with a tired face and a demeanor that screamed conflict avoidance. He had likely been summoned by another crew member who sensed the situation was spiraling. "Brenda, what's the hold-up?" he asked, trying to sound authoritative, but coming across as weary. "This passenger," Brenda said, gesturing to Imani with a dismissive flick of her wrist, "is refusing to take her seat. She's making a fuss about a few crumbs and is demanding the crew clean it for her." Mark looked from Brenda's indignant face to Imani's calm one. He then glanced at the seat. He clearly saw the mess, but he also clearly saw his senior-ranking, notoriously difficult colleague in a full state of agitation. He made the calculation of the path of least resistance. "Ma'am," Mark said, addressing Imani but not quite meeting her eyes, "we really do need to get everyone seated. If you could just tidy it up a bit, we can get on our way. I'm sure it's just a small oversight from the ground crew." His tone was placating, but the message was the same fall in line. He was backing his colleague, validating her unreasonable demand. The corporate culture Imani had suspected one of covering for colleagues rather than serving the customer was playing out right in front of her. Imani looked at Mark, then back at Brenda. Their united front was a fortress of mediocrity and prejudice. She could escalate. She could demand to speak to the captain. She could refuse and be forcibly removed, creating a viral video and a PR nightmare for her own company. That would be the easy, explosive route. But it wouldn't give her what she truly wanted. It wouldn't expose the rot. An explosion is messy and chaotic. A controlled demolition, on the other hand, is precise. It brings the whole structure down by targeting its weakest points. A new plan began to form in her mind, a much more thorough and much more devastating plan. To execute it, she needed to do something that went against every fiber of her being. She needed to submit. For now. "Fine," Imani said, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. The word hung in the air, surprising everyone, most of all Brenda, whose face flickered with a triumphant smirk. "I will clean the seat," Imani continued, her eyes locking on to Brenda's. "But first, I will need some supplies, gloves and whatever cleaning solution you have. And I'll also need both of your names and employee numbers. For the formal complaint I'll be filing with Starlight Airlines corporate headquarters upon landing." The smirk on Brenda's face wavered. The mention of a formal complaint with names and numbers attached was a direct challenge. Mark looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Brenda, however, was too deep in her power trip to back down now. To her, this was just another empty threat from a disgruntled passenger. She probably received a dozen such threats a week. "Of course," Brenda sneered, her confidence returning. "Brenda Miller, employee number 4815I1. He is Mark Jensen, 39902. I'll get you some cleaning wipes from the galley." She turned and marched toward the front of the plane, her back ramrod straight. She believed she had won. She had asserted her dominance, put the difficult passenger in her place, and was about to enjoy the ultimate satisfaction of watching her bend to her will. Imani watched her go. She felt dozens of pairs of eyes on her, a mixture of pity, discomfort, and disbelief. She ignored them all. Her mind was already at 30,000 feet, soaring far ahead of the aircraft. She wasn't just thinking about a complaint anymore. She was thinking about a corporate restructuring, and it was going to start with Brenda Miller and Mark Jensen. Brenda returned with a smug sense of finality. In her hand, she held not a proper cleaning kit, but a thin, travel-sized packet of generic wet wipes and a pair of flimsy latex gloves, the kind found in a basic first aid kit. She thrust them at Imani, not with a gesture of assistance but of command. "Here," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This should be sufficient for you to handle your situation." Imani took the items without a word. She slowly, deliberately pulled on the ill-fitting gloves. The silence in the cabin was now thick and heavy. Liam Peterson, in seat 17B, had discreetly propped his phone against the window, angling it perfectly. The red recording dot was a tiny, secret witness. He zoomed in slightly to capture the name tags on the flight attendants' uniforms, with the eyes of the surrounding passengers fixed on her Imani Grant founder and CEO of a tech empire worth over $20 billion, and the majority owner of the very airline she was on, knelt in the narrow aisle of Flight 1128. The position was humbling, designed to be so. She could feel the rough texture of the cheap carpet through her trousers. She was at eye level with the armrests, the discarded snack wrappers, and the shoes of her fellow travelers. From this vantage point, she saw the grime in the seat tracks and the dust bunnies clinging to the base of the seats. More data. She took one of the flimsy wipes and began to clean the seat cushion. Methodically, she wiped away the croissant crumbs, her movements calm and measured. Brenda stood over her arms, crossed a silent, gloating overseer. Mark lingered a few rows back, looking anywhere but at the scene, his face a mask of weary complicity. He was a man who had long ago traded his spine for a steady paycheck. When Imani reached the sticky purple juice stain, the single wipe proved useless. It merely smeared the mess around. "This isn't really cleaning it," Imani stated, looking up at Brenda without breaking her rhythm. "It's just spreading it. Do the best you can," Brenda snapped. "We need to close the cabin door 5 minutes ago." Imani took a deep breath, fighting back a wave of cold anger. This wasn't just bad service. It was a calculated act of degradation. Brenda wasn't just trying to solve a problem. She was enjoying the spectacle, deriving a sick pleasure from the power she wielded. Imani used a second wipe, then a third, scrubbing at the sticky patch until it was mostly gone, leaving only a faint discoloration. She then opened the seatback pocket and, using a fresh wipe as a barrier, removed the crumpled used napkin left by the previous passenger. She tucked it into the now dirty wipes in her gloved hand. Finally, she rose to her feet, her movements graceful and unhurried. She pulled off the gloves, bundling the soiled wipes inside them. She looked around for a place to dispose of the trash. Brenda simply pointed a manicured finger toward the galley at the back of the plane. "There's a trash receptacle there." Imani didn't argue. She walked the length of the cabin, the bundle of trash in her hand, feeling the stares of the other passengers on her back. When she returned, Brenda and Mark had retreated to the front, preparing for the cabin door to close. The ordeal seemed to be over. She finally sat down in seat 17C. The fabric was still slightly damp. The young couple next to her, who had been frozen in silence, finally stirred. "I am so sorry you had to go through that." The young woman in the window seat whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "That was unbelievable." Liam Peterson in the middle seat leaned over slightly. "I got the whole thing on video," he murmured, his voice low. "Her name, his name, the whole demand. I can't believe them. If you file a complaint, I'll be your witness. I'll send you the file." Imani turned to him, a genuine warmth entering her eyes for the first time. "Thank you," she said softly. "That might be very helpful. I'm Imani, by the way." "Liam," he replied, shaking her offered hand. "I'm a journalism student. I know an abuse of power when I see one." He discreetly airdropped the video file to her phone. Imani accepted it, catching a glimpse of the footage. It was crystal clear. It captured Brenda's sneering face, Mark's weak acquiescence, and her own quiet dignity as she knelt on the floor. It was perfect. It was irrefutable. It was the nail for the coffin she was now building. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom, a cheerful, generic welcome to Starlight Airlines. He apologized for the minor delay and promised a smooth flight to Dallas. Brenda began the safety demonstration, her movements robotic, her voice devoid of any emotion except a lingering bitterness. When her eyes swept over row 17, she gave Imani a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was the look of a victor. Imani met her gaze and gave her something she didn't expect, a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of acknowledgement, a confirmation. Message received. Brenda, misinterpreting it as a sign of submission, turned away with a flicker of a self-satisfied smile. But it wasn't a nod of submission. It was a nod of acceptance of the challenge. The battle on Flight 1128 was over, and Brenda had won. But the war for the soul of Starlight Airlines had just begun. And Imani Grant never ever lost a war. The flight to Dallas-Fort Worth was 3.5 hours long. For Imani, it was a masterclass in everything that was wrong with her airline. The in-flight service, led by Brenda and overseen by Mark, was a study in weaponized indifference. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign pinged off. Brenda and another flight attendant began the beverage service, starting from the front of the economy cabin. Imani watched her work. She was a Jekyll and Hyde of customer service. To the handsome businessman in row 12, she was all smiles and professional charm. To the young mother across the aisle struggling to soothe a fussy baby, she was a statue of icy disapproval, pointedly ignoring the call button for 10 full minutes. When the cart reached row 17, Brenda's professional mask was gone, replaced once again by the cold disdain she reserved for Imani. "Drink?" she asked, her tone flat. "I'll have a coffee, please." "Black," Imani replied politely. Brenda slopped the hot coffee into a paper cup, not bothering to use a napkin to catch the spill that trickled down the side. She practically slammed it onto Imani's tray table. "Anything else?" "Yes, I'd like to purchase the Wi-Fi access, please," Imani said. Brenda sighed dramatically. "You need an app for that, or you can use the portal. I'm not tech support." She began to push the cart away. "The portal isn't loading," Imani said calmly, holding up her phone to show the endlessly spinning loading icon. This was another known issue she wanted to experience firsthand, the notoriously spotty and overpriced internet service. "Not my problem," Brenda muttered loud enough for Liam to hear. "Try again later." And she moved on. Liam leaned over again. "Unreal. Do you want me to hotspot my phone for you? I paid for the full flight package, and it's actually working." "That's very kind of you, Liam, but no thank you," Imani said, with a grateful smile. "I'm actually more interested in the failure of the system than in getting online." Liam looked at her, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. She wasn't behaving like a typical angry passenger. She was too calm, too observant. She was like a scientist studying a strange, toxic specimen. Imani spent the rest of the flight taking meticulous notes on her phone. She documented the slow response to call buttons, the trash left in the aisles, the dismissive attitude of the crew, and the broken Wi-Fi. Every failure was a bullet point in the damning report she was composing in her head. Mark, for his part, remained a ghost. He made one pass through the cabin, collecting trash with a look of profound boredom, carefully avoiding any eye contact with row 17. He was a portrait of complicity, a man who enabled the toxicity of others through his own inaction. He was just as guilty as Brenda, perhaps even more so. Brenda was a predator, but Mark was the one who unlocked the cage. As the plane began its initial descent into Dallas, Imani felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Her undercover mission had been more successful than she could have imagined. She had wanted to find the truth of the Starlight passenger experience, and the truth had been delivered to her in the most visceral, humiliating way possible. This single flight encapsulated every negative customer review, every letter of complaint, every reason why Starlight Airlines was failing. It wasn't just about aging planes or bad coffee. It was about a culture of disrespect that had been allowed to fester unchecked in the pressurized cabins of their aircraft. The plane touched down smoothly at DFW. As it taxied to the gate, Brenda's voice came over the PA system, a pre-recorded cheerfulness in her tone. On behalf of the entire Starlight family, we'd like to thank you for flying with us today. We know you have a choice when you fly, and we thank you for choosing us. Imani almost laughed at the bitter irony. The Starlight family. It sounded more like a crime family. As passengers began to stand and retrieve their bags, Imani remained seated. She waited patiently for the aisle to clear, showing no hurry. Liam stood up. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Imani, under the circumstances," he said, handing her a business card he'd printed for his internship. "My email and cell are on there. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need that video or a statement. What she did was wrong." "I will, Liam. Thank you for your integrity," Imani said, shaking his hand warmly. "It's refreshing." Finally, the aisle was clear enough for her to leave. As she walked toward the front of the plane, she saw Brenda and Mark standing near the cockpit door, bidding farewell to the departing passengers. When Brenda saw Imani approaching her, smile vanished. She turned her back slightly, presenting Imani with her shoulder, a final petty act of disrespect. Imani didn't rise to the bait. She simply walked past them and stepped onto the jet bridge without a word. She didn't look back. In Brenda's mind, the story was over. She had dealt with a difficult passenger, put her in her place, and would now head to the hotel for her layover, perhaps complaining to her colleagues over dinner about the entitled woman in 17C. She had no idea that for Imani Grant, the story was just beginning. Imani walked through the bustling terminal, her carry-on rolling silently behind her. She ignored the signs for baggage claim and connecting flights. Instead, she followed the signs for ground transportation, but she wasn't looking for a taxi or a shuttle. She pulled out her phone and made a call not to her car service, but to the one person who needed to hear this story immediately. The phone was answered on the first ring. "James, it's Imani. Clear your morning schedule. Clear the entire day. We have a 5-alarm fire in customer service, and I'm coming to headquarters now. And get Sarah Jenkins from HR on the line. I want her in the meeting. We are going to completely fumigate our house." James Brown, the CEO of Starlight Airlines, a man accustomed to Imani's decisive and sometimes dramatic directives, could hear the steel in her voice. "Understood, Imani. I'll see you in an hour." "What happened?" Imani paused, watching one of her own Starlight planes take off in the distance. "What happened," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "is that I just learned what it's truly like to fly on my own airline." The Starlight Airlines corporate headquarters was a gleaming glass tower just a few miles from the DFW airport, a monument to a bygone era of aviation prestige. Inside on the top floor was the executive boardroom. It was a space designed to project power and confidence, with a sprawling mahogany table, panoramic views of the airfield, and walls adorned with stylized photos of Starlight's aircraft soaring through majestic clouds. By the time Imani arrived, James Brown and Sarah Jenkins were already waiting. James was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his early 50s, known for his operational genius and his unflinching loyalty to Imani, whom he respected immensely. Sarah, the senior vice president of human resources and legal affairs, was a formidable woman with a mind like a steel trap and a reputation for handling the company's messiest problems with quiet, ruthless efficiency. They both stood as Imani walked in. She had not changed out of her travel clothes, and her calm, focused fury was a palpable force in the room. "Imani, are you all right?" James asked, his face etched with concern. "Your call was alarming." "I'm fine, James. The company, however, is critically ill," Imani said, placing her phone on the polished surface of the table. "Sarah, thank you for coming on such short notice. I trust this conversation will be covered by every imaginable privilege and non-disclosure agreement." "Of course, Imani," Sarah replied, her eyes sharp and analytical. "What's going on?" Imani took a deep breath. For the next 20 minutes, she recounted the events of Flight 1128. She started with the dismissive greeting at the door and ended with Brenda's final snub on the jet bridge. She relayed the entire incident at row 17 in painstaking, emotionless detail: the false accusation, the unreasonable demand, the public humiliation, Mark's spineless complicity, and the names and employee numbers she had collected. She spoke not as a victim, but as a field researcher presenting her findings. When she finished, a heavy silence descended upon the boardroom. James Brown's face was pale, a mixture of shock and incandescent rage. Sarah Jenkins was impassive, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her pen. "They made you. Get on your knees and clean the seat." James finally said, his voice barely a whisper. The idea was so grotesque, so far beyond the pale of mere bad service, that he could hardly comprehend it. "Yes," Imani said simply, in front of at least a dozen other passengers. Sarah finally spoke, her voice precise and cold. "And you have their names and employee numbers: Brenda Miller, 48-1 and Mark Jensen, 3999 "I do," Imani confirmed. "And I have something else." She tapped her phone, and the video Liam Peterson had taken filled the large monitor at the end of the boardroom. The footage was damning. The audio was crisp. Brenda's sneering voice, her condescending words, Mark's weak attempt at de-escalation by siding with her. It was all there. The video culminated in the gut-wrenching image of Imani, the owner of the company, on her hands and knees, cleaning the seat under Brenda's watchful eye. James Brown let out a string of curses under his breath, pushing his chair back from the table, as if the images on the screen were physically repulsive. Sarah Jenkins just watched, her expression hardening into one of grim resolve. She had seen the worst of employee behavior, from theft to harassment, but this was in a category of its own. This wasn't just a violation of company policy. It was a violation of basic human decency, broadcast as a public spectacle. "I need their full employee files. Immediately," Sarah said, already typing on her laptop. "Commendations, complaints, everything. I want to know who trained them, who promoted them, and who has been signing off on their performance reviews." "Already on it," James said, his voice tight with fury. "My assistant is pulling them now. The union is going to be a nightmare." "Let them be," Sarah shot back, not looking up from her screen. "The union does not protect employees who engage in discriminatory harassment and create a hostile environment for passengers. And that's exactly what this is. We have video evidence of a senior crew member targeting a passenger, based on, at the very least, a presumption of guilt that is hard to separate from racial bias, and then engaging in punitive and humiliating actions. Her purser was complicit. This is a lawsuit of catastrophic proportions waiting to happen. There won't be a lawsuit, Imani said quietly. James and Sarah looked at her confused. There won't be a lawsuit, Imani repeated, because the passenger in question has no intention of suing her own company. But we are going to act as if she would. We are going to act as if this passenger was a civil rights attorney with a camera crew, and we are going to bring the full weight of this corporation down on the two individuals who caused this. And then we are going to go further. She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the starlight jets, taxiing on the tarmac below. This isn't about two bad employees, James. They are symptoms of the disease, not the disease itself. The disease is a culture where employees feel they are untouchable, where rules are applied selectively, and where the dignity of our passengers is an afterthought. Brenda Miller felt comfortable doing what she did, because on some level our culture told her it was okay. Mark Jensen let it happen, because our culture rewards inaction and conflict avoidance. We are going to change that. Starting tomorrow. She turned back to face them, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made them both sit up straighter. Here's the plan. Sarah, you will draft termination papers for both Miller and Jensen, for that reason. Gross misconduct, passenger endangerment, through intimidation, and violation of federal anti-discrimination statutes. I want their company credentials, including flight access, revoked immediately. They are to be grounded as of this second. She then turned to James. James, I want you to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. here in this boardroom. You will summon Brenda Miller and Mark Jensen to headquarters for a mandatory review of an in-flight incident. Don't tell them anything else, just that their presence is required. I will be at that meeting. James's eyes widened. Imani, you don't have to face them again. Oh, I'm not going to face them, James, Imani said, a chillingly calm smile touching her lips. I'm going to educate them. And after that, you and I are going to draft a memo to every single employee of this airline. We are announcing a top-to-bottom overhaul of our in-flight service, training a new zero-tolerance policy for passenger mistreatment, and the launch of a new independently monitored system for reporting employee misconduct. The video of this incident will be the centerpiece of our new training module on what not to do. Flight 1128 is going to become a legend in this company. It will be the day Starlight Airlines either died or was reborn. The storm had gathered. The pieces were in place. All that was left was for the lightning to strike. Brenda Miller and Mark Jensen arrived at corporate headquarters at 8:50 a.m. the next day. The Hawk, Brenda was dressed in a sharp business suit, her flight attendant uniform exchanged for an outfit she thought projected management potential. She was confident, almost smug. A summons to headquarters for an in-flight incident was in her experience a formality. It usually meant a difficult passenger had filed a complaint, and she would give her side of the story, be backed up by her purser, and the company would send a form letter and a travel voucher to the passenger to make them go away. She saw it as an opportunity to reinforce her reputation as a no-nonsense crew member who kept her flights in line. Mark was less confident. He looked nervous, his tie slightly askew. He hadn't slept well. The image of the woman on her knees had replayed in his mind, and for the first time in years, he felt a prick of conscience, which was quickly overshadowed by a gnawing anxiety. They were escorted to the top-floor boardroom by a silent assistant. When they walked in, their confidence faltered. This was not the small windowless HR office where such matters were usually handled. This was the executive sanctum. Seated at the far end of the vast mahogany table were James Brown, the CEO, and Sarah Jenkins, the formidable head of legal and HR. The atmosphere was glacial. "Brenda, Mark, please sit." James said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. He gestured to the 2 chairs placed opposite them, which seemed miles away across the polished wood. They sat. Brenda arranged her skirt, trying to project an air of calm cooperation. Mark just fidgeted with his briefcase. "Thank you for coming in." James began, his eyes like chips of ice. "We're here to discuss an incident that occurred yesterday on Flight 1128 from JFK to DFW, involving a passenger in seat 17C. Brenda immediately launched into her prepared narrative. Yes, of course, the passenger was disruptive from the moment she boarded. She was holding up the line, and then she became belligerent about the condition of her seat, which was a minor issue. She refused to sit down, delaying our departure. For the safety and security of the flight, and as per protocol, I instructed her to resolve the situation so we could proceed. Mark can corroborate. She was being very difficult. Mark mumbled weakly. Yes, she was. Not cooperative. Sarah Jenkins slid 2 thick personnel files across the table. "Your files," she stated. "Brenda, yours is full of commendations for on-time departures, but it's also flagged with an unusually high number of passenger complaints, all of them citing rudeness and a condescending attitude. All of them were dismissed with a note from your direct supervisor about your efficiency. Mark, your file is clean. Almost too clean. 22 years of service without a single incident, positive or negative. The file of a man who makes no waves." Before they could respond, the door at the far end of the boardroom opened. Imani Grant walked in. She was dressed in a razor-sharp, dark blue power suit. Her hair was immaculate. The only thing they recognized were her eyes, the same calm, intelligent eyes that had watched them from the aisle of Flight 1128. Brenda's jaw went slack. Her face, which had been a mask of confident indignation, crumpled into a canvas of pure, horrified disbelief. The blood drained from her face, leaving a pasty grey pallor. Mark looked like he had seen a ghost. He physically recoiled in his chair, his mind struggling to connect the woman in the simple travel clothes with the titan of industry now standing at the head of the table. "Good morning, Brenda, Mark," Imani said, her voice quiet, but resonating with absolute power. She took her seat at the head of the table. "I believe we've met. I was the passenger in 17C, but today I'm here as the majority owner of Starlight Airlines, your boss." The silence that followed was so profound that the hum of the building's ventilation system sounded like a roar. Brenda opened and closed her mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. "I called this meeting because I wanted to look you both in the eye and thank you," Imani continued, her calm delivery, more terrifying than any shouting match could ever be. "You see, I've been trying for months to understand why this airline is failing. I've read reports, I've analyzed data, but I couldn't grasp the core problem. Yesterday, you showed me. You gave me a multi-million-dollar education in exactly what is wrong with our corporate culture. So thank you." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Brenda, you targeted a passenger. You publicly humiliated her. You abused your authority and weaponized safety regulations to bully someone you perceived as beneath you. You did this not because of a few crumbs, but because you felt powerful doing it. You are a liability this company can no longer afford." She then turned her gaze to Mark. "And you, Mark, you are perhaps the greater disappointment. You saw an injustice. You saw your colleague engaging in unprofessional, unethical, and potentially illegal behavior. You had the authority and the moral obligation to intervene. And you did nothing. You stood by and let it happen because it was easier than confronting her. Your silence makes you complicit in every way. The rot in this company isn't just the bullies. It's the cowards who let them thrive. Sarah Jenkins pushed 2 envelopes across the table. Your termination notice, she said crisply. Effective immediately. You are being terminated for cause for gross misconduct. As such, you will not be receiving a severance package, and your flight benefits are cancelled as of this moment. Your final paychecks will be mailed to you. Security will now escort you from the building to retrieve your personal effects from your lockers. You are not to have any further contact with any Starlight Airlines employees. Brenda finally found her voice, a high-pitched, desperate squeak. You can't do this. I have rights. I'll go to the union. I'll sue. Imani leaned forward slightly. Please do. I invite you to. The union has already been sent a copy of the high-definition video of the incident in which you and Mark are clearly identifiable. We are prepared for any legal action you might take, and I assure you our legal team is far better than any you can afford. A lawsuit would involve discovery where dozens of other passengers from that flight would be called to testify about what they saw. Your name, Brenda Miller, would become synonymous with corporate bigotry. By all means, sue us. You would be doing me a favor. The fight drained out of Brenda's eyes, replaced by the hollow look of utter ruin. She had lost. She had played her game of power and had come up against the final boss, not realizing she was even in the game. Mark just sat there, slumped in his chair, a broken man. He didn't protest. He knew he had failed a test he hadn't even realized he was taking. Your corporate access badges were deactivated an hour ago, James Brown added, his voice grim. Security is waiting outside. 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. The reckoning was complete. It was swift, brutal, and absolute. As the guards led a sobbing Brenda and a shell-shocked Mark from the pinnacle of corporate power they had so briefly inhabited, Imani looked at James and Sarah. Her expression wasn't triumphant. It was sober-determined. This wasn't a victory. It was an exorcism. And the hard work was just beginning. The termination of Brenda Miller and Mark Jensen was not a quiet affair. It was the first shot in a revolution Imani Grant waged on her own company. The memo she and James Brown sent out that afternoon rocked Starlight Airlines to its core. It detailed, without naming names, the abhorrent and unacceptable incident of passenger mistreatment, and announced a new, non-negotiable standard of service, the Dignity Protocol. The centerpiece of this new era was a mandatory all-day training seminar for all 12,000 tours of Starlight's customer-facing employees, from gate agents to pilots and flight attendants. Imani herself led the first session for senior management and flight crew trainers. In a packed auditorium, she played the unedited video from Flight 1128. Gasps rippled through the room as they watched the scene unfold. The woman in this video is me, Imani announced to the stunned crowd. But that is irrelevant. It could have been any of you. It could have been your mother, your brother, your child. The person in seat 17C represents every single customer who pays our salaries and trusts us with their safety. The moment we forget that we are no longer a service company, we are just a metal tube with wings, and we will fail. The video became a powerful, infamous tool. It wasn't used to shame, but to teach. It sparked difficult, necessary conversations about unconscious bias, abuse of authority, and the critical importance of de-escalation and empathy. An anonymous reporting system, the Starlight Watch, was implemented, managed by a third-party ethics firm, ensuring that no complaint could ever be buried by a complicit supervisor again. The changes were painful. Some veteran employees resistant to the new culture quit or took early retirement. The flight attendants' union filed a grievance over the new training, but quietly dropped it after their lawyers reviewed the video and the mountain of supporting evidence of a systemic problem. But for many, it was a breath of fresh air. Good employees who had been stifled by the toxic culture felt empowered. New talent attracted by the company's public commitment to a renewed ethos began to apply. 6 months after the incident, Imani received an email with the subject line, "A witness from Flight 1128. It was from Liam Peterson. He had attached a link to an article he'd written for a major travel magazine where he was now an intern. The article was titled, "The Starlight Turnaround, How a Dying Airline Found Its Soul." It detailed the incredible shift in customer satisfaction scores, the glowing new reviews, and the palpable change in employee morale. He mentioned anecdotally a flight he had taken where he witnessed a flight attendant patiently spend 20 minutes helping an elderly woman figure out the entertainment system. It was a story of redemption. At the end of his email, Liam wrote, "P.S. I never did find out what happened with your complaint about that flight attendant. I hope something was done. What you endured was awful, but the changes I'm seeing at this airline are amazing." Imani smiled. She wrote back a simple reply, "Liam, thank you for your article. Things were done. As a token of my personal appreciation for your integrity, please accept Lifetime Platinum Medallion status with Starlight Airlines. We need more people like you watching. Keep up the great work." She then booked a flight, JFK to LAX. She didn't book it undercover. She booked it as Imani Grant, chairwoman of the board. When she boarded the purser, a bright-eyed young man greeted her by name with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Grant. It's an honor to have you with us." As she settled into her first-class seat, he leaned in. "I just wanted to say, Ms. Grant, I was in that first training seminar, the one with the video. It changed everything for us. Thank you." Imani looked at him, then around the clean, bright cabin at the attentive and respectful crew. This was the airline she had envisioned. This was the airline she had paid for, not just with money, but with a moment of profound humiliation in row 17. As the plane soared above the clouds, she looked out the window at the endless blue horizon. The journey had been turbulent, but the destination, a company built not just on profit, but on a foundation of dignity for all, was finally in sight. The story of Imani Grant and Flight 1128 is a powerful reminder that true leadership isn't about wearing a crown. It's about walking in the shoes of the people you serve. It shows us that one person's refusal to accept injustice can spark a revolution, and that the most satisfying karma isn't just about revenge, but about reconstruction. Brenda Miller didn't just lose her job. She became a catalyst for a change that positively affected thousands of employees and millions of passengers. Imani's quiet strength turned a moment of personal degradation into a legacy of corporate dignity. If you believe that respect and integrity should be at the heart of every business, and if you were cheering for Imani's quiet, calculated victory, then please let us know by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that the little guy, or in this case, the secretly powerful, can win. And for more incredible stories of karma justice and real-life drama, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. What would you have done in Imani's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.